Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight. My name is Ironetta Wright, and I am the superintendent of Cincinnati Public Schools, and I would like to welcome those in the audience and those that are viewing with us through Blue Jeans and through Facebook Live to our Safety Town Hall. You know, it is important for us to recognize that safety is a top priority for all of us. It's a top priority across our district, and we want to make certain that by the time we finish our conversation tonight, that it is clear to our families, it's clear to our staff, it's clear to our students and our community that we are taking safety very seriously, and we recognize that not only are we concerned about our students having physical safety, but we want to ensure that they have psychological safety as well. So before I start with the presentation, I would like to recognize three of my board members that I have here with me tonight. I have board member Eve Bolton, who's here with me. I have our vice president, Carolyn Jones, who's here with me. And tonight we'll also have Dr. Moffitt, who is one of our board members, but she will also be serving as our moderator for tonight when we get to our question and answer section during our actual panel discussion. So as we start, I want to start here because I really do want to share that as we look at the work that we're doing across the district, we're doing that thinking about information that's already been provided to us. So this particular slide is a specific slide that is from Homeland Security. And it talks about, as you look through the slide, Homeland Security starts with hometown security. So there are four areas that we'll talk through tonight as we look at the work that we're doing in our schools collectively around safety. The first thing we want to do is connect. One of the reasons that we're opening this, we have it so that we have all stakeholders that are involved, because it starts with connections and the conversations that we have with those that are a part of our community. And then we want to look at how we plan. We want to be prepared. We recognize across the country we are not looking to have a major incident, but the reality is things are happening across the country. So if we are not prepared, then we're ill prepared. So it's important for our children, our staff, and our families and community to recognize that we are prepared and we plan for that preparation. Professional development and training is also important. How we are training our students in case of emergency, how we're training our staff, how we're working with the larger community for training, how we're working with our local agencies around training, and then what do we do in terms of reporting. One of the things that we like to say here, if you see something, say something. That's so important, and it's something that we'll continue to come back to. So the first is connections. Connection, community relationships and community conversations. Conversations both internal and external. Conversations with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Our internal stakeholders is everyone that's actually a part of our school district, making sure that our teachers are aware, our principals are informed, our students are informed, all of our staff is informed about our safety protocols, but also working with our external partners as well, our police departments, our fire departments, our faith-based partners, our medical professionals, as well as the larger community. So we want to connect through community relationships. The next we talk about quite a bit in terms of thinking about our Cincinnati Police Department and what is provided for us as we work with our school resource officers. When we think specifically around the levels of concern or threat that are sometimes happening across schools, we want to make sure that there is clarity around the partnership or the relationship that CPS currently has with CPD. So the first thing that I would like to share is the School Resource Officer Program is actually a program that was generated by Cincinnati Police Department. It was not a program that was generated by us. It was done by Cincinnati Police Department. And as a result of this, through the engagement process, it really works with sworn officers that have a desire to work with children in schools. And how this has happened since 1967 in our city, and it's funded by the city. We have 13 officers right now that work in our district schools. Primarily, they are in high schools, but they serve over 70 schools across the city. That's CPS schools, that's private schools, that's parochial schools. They serve across the city. It's really important to recognize that over 70 schools, officers are working with across the city. Each CPD officer has access badge to our entries to our school. And that's not just our SROs, that is all of the officers that are officers within the department. Why is this important? Because if there is an emergency, a true emergency, there is not time to wait for someone to come and get someone in the building. So all of our officers have access to that. The other thing that's important here around our SROs is SROs are not a part of CPS student discipline or the student discipline process. When it comes to school safety, specifically around the SRO and SRO conversation, each SRO is ALICE trained, and ALICE stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. All of our officers are trained. All of the CPD officers are also trained in active shooter protocols, and there's a minimum of 3 lockdown drills that are done each year per school year in partnership with our SROs. Consistent threat assessments are also conducted and high visibility as we work throughout the school day. And then we think about planning. As we think about our school buildings, what happens at our schools around planning, physical security equipment, as well as technology. So there are a couple different ways that we think about how we plan. All of our staff, you see I have mine hidden right now, but all of our staff, we have a badge access that gets us into our school buildings. So that's the first thing, and that's for all staff. There's a badge that allows us to go in. A designated secure entry. So there is one point of access that's designated as a secure entry into the building, which essentially means anyone that comes to that entry has to be let into the facility. They have to be let into the building. All of our schools have a lobby guard kiosk for visitor management. For some schools, it's in the foyer area. For other schools, it's inside the office. But this allows us to also monitor individuals that are coming into our schools through the badge process, and also checks for predators and that kind of thing as well. So that's through that process. When you go into the schools, they ask you for your ID. When you give your ID, you get a printed badge, and that is through the lobby guard process. We have metal detectors in all high schools, as well as handheld detectors in all of our elementary school buildings. We also have security camera systems and two-way radios for communication. So just thinking about the process for physical security equipment and technology, those things are available in our schools. The second that is really important as we begin to think about psychological safety, and we want to recognize and continue to reiterate that safety is the responsibility of all of us. Safety is the responsibility of all of us. Can I get everyone to say that with me? Safety is the responsibility of all of us. It is our responsibility. If we see something, we are to say something. It is the responsibility of every person in the school building. Having served as an educator now for almost 30 years, I recognize that not one individual in a school building is responsible for the safety of the school. It takes everyone. It is important that everyone knows and understands the protocols, and they're following up with those protocols. It's also important to recognize that our students also need to know what those protocols are, and that we also honor the fact that they are students. And sometimes students do things like walk by doors and put something in the door so they can come back in at another time, right? So what do? We monitor those things during the day to make sure if there is a rock in the door so they can come back through that door versus going through the front. It gives an opportunity to close the door so that we know that we're following the procedures that are expected. But when we think about psychological safety, we're talking about our students feeling safe and connected. How they know that there's someone at the school that they can have communication with, that they can talk to if there's a challenge. What are the social emotional opportunities that are available for our children? The one thing that I'd like to point out is within our school district, across the curriculum, all grade levels, social emotional learning is embedded in our curriculum. In most of our content areas, it's in the English language arts curriculum. So there you're talking about all of the characteristics, you're talking about character development, you're talking about how you get help, you're talking about how you engage with others, you're talking about safety in that space. In our advisor lessons, specifically for our 3rd through 12th grade students, we have additional social emotional learning lessons that are a part of a separate class that students 3rd through 12th grade take during advisee lessons. And then we have our school social workers. So for those that don't know, every one of our schools has a school social worker. Every one of our schools has a school social worker. Our district also, over the past year, invested in additional school counselors in our high schools as well. So we're working at the core level across all content areas by working through our curriculum. We also have school social workers that are in our buildings. We also have in our high schools, not just school social workers, but school social workers and school counselors. And all of our schools at this point also have a nurse. So our school social workers provide small group instruction, in small or individual group instruction for social emotional support. How many of you, that's new learning for you? If that's new learning for you, wave at me. If you did not know that we had school social workers, some people are not being honest. I'm looking at the group. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, the next is mental health. Mental health. It is important that we connect across our community, that it's okay not to be okay. It's not okay to stay not okay. I'm going to say that again. Because concerns around mental health are so taboo, still in so many communities, it is important for us to continue to emphasize to everyone, it is okay not to be okay. It's okay not to feel okay. It's okay to have a rough day. It's okay. It is not okay to stay in that space. And we have resources available at our schools, right at our schools, to provide support to our students that are having mental health concerns. All of our social workers, and I already shared that each school has a school social worker. All of our social workers are trained in mental health first aid. One of the things that mental health first aid does is it shares, and I'm trained in mental health first aid as well. I have been for a long time. And one of the things that mental health first aid does is it prepares you to look for warning signs for children that are having challenges. It gives you information for resources, for how to provide support to them, for how to have conversations with them, for how to talk to families, because there are still some families that have some concern about talking to their children about mental health. There are still some concerns with that. So we want to make sure that we're in a space where we share with our students and we share with our children that we want to provide you the support that's necessary. Not only are our social workers trained, but across the district, they are trained and they are prepared to provide training to the staff. One of the areas for next steps for us across the district is to ensure that that's happening across all of our schools. So there's one thing to have the training available. There is something else to expect the training to happen. And there's a third thing to monitor that it did happen. Does that make sense to everyone? So having the trainers available is one thing. So our school social workers, they have the training. So there's several individuals in our buildings that have already had mental health first aid training. Because it's been provided for them, it's optional for them, and it's a training that's provided. It generally takes about 6 hours for that training, and then there's touchback sessions with that as well, 6 to 8 hours. But there's something else to monitor, have the expectation, and then monitor that it happens. Our security staff is provided training in mental health first aid, and I'm talking about security personnel that work in our school buildings. Why? Because a lot of times they are the first point of contact for our students. If a child is having a challenge, if they're having a rough day, if they need some support, if they need someone to talk to, sometimes the first person that they see is the security personnel when they come to the school. So making certain that our security personnel are trained in mental health first aid is important. Suicide prevention protocols and risk assessment training are available in schools for select staff. And I want to share what that means in terms of select staff. That means our school social workers. That means our school counselors. That means an administrator at a school. So that you're looking at if a student talks about self-harm, you have a self-harm protocol that you're going through with them to help determine their risk. Low risk, medium risk, or high risk. You know, I'm the mother of 2 daughters. And in talking to them and talking to some of their friends, sometimes you have students that are just having a bad day and they say something that they really don't mean. But you don't want to assume that they're just playing, right? So you take the assessment and you go through the process with them. You ask those pointed questions that are a part of that protocol. And then from there, you determine whether there is a low risk, they're just having a bad day, a medium risk, they may need someone to have a check-in, check-out support with, or they're at high risk, which means we need to get them to some services immediately. And then mental health and therapeutic counseling is provided at each of our schools in partnership with MindPeace. Our students across our district have access to our school-based health centers, our school-based health clinics. So not only are we providing medical support, but we're also providing social emotional support and psychological support for our children. The next is training. There are required number of drills that we are required to have by the state of Ohio every year. So there are some families that say, you know, you have too many drills. I've already gotten some of those emails. We have too many drills. My child is not comfortable with the drills. What do we need to do a better job of? Communicating with our students that we are just having a drill, everything is fine, letting them know that everything is okay. Because just as there are concerns in the room around safety, our children see what's in the media. They see what's happening and they get nervous as well. I remember my daughter being a 12th grader, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I was an administrator at the time. And she called one day because that was their 7th bomb threat that they'd had at their school in less than a week. And my child was accustomed to seeing that because she worked with me all the time. She would hear me go through protocols, but I could hear in her voice that day, she wasn't okay. Mom is just too much today. And so we want to make sure that we're responsive to that and we respond to our children. But we are required to have the lockdowns. We are required to have tornado drills, and we're required to have fire drills. And we are in compliance with that as a district. Also, each of our schools submits yearly. A yearly operations plan is reviewed and updated each year, which is a part of our crisis management process. And we conduct a yearly threat assessments at the schools, more frequently if needed, but at least once a year. When we think about school security personnel, is this helpful for anyone so far? I see some people nodding. Is that yes? Thumbs up, yes? Okay, for those that are online, we'll come to you in a minute. School security personnel. We have security assistants at all of our schools. Our security assistants are trained in our procedures and security equipment. We cover specific training topics, and I got an opportunity today and go and greet some of our new security personnel as they're coming. Before they start in our schools, they have about 7 days, full days of training. That training covers ALICE, which we just talked about. It covers youth mental health concerns, and it covers random search procedures. Today, actually, while I was in the training with them, they were talking about social media and how social media can cause challenges, and how as a security assistant, you're able to assist through that process. So that was just today. And we have school-based crisis prevention institute trained team members in the school, and that's CPI training. So essentially what that means is if you have a child or an individual that goes into crisis at the school, there is specific training that you're doing with them so that they are not harmed, they don't harm themselves, and that no one else is injured. Training exercises and drills, I've already shared that each year we have a certain number of drills that we cover, but also each year district-wide we go through safe schools training for all of our staff. It covers the topics that are on the screen: emergency procedures, safety orientation, ALICE, cybersecurity, bullying, and child abuse for all of our staff. It's a requirement each year. A next step for us, because we get the reminders, and initially I didn't know what the reminders were. I started May the 2nd, and I started getting this reminder saying, you didn't do this training. I'm thinking, I did all of my stuff. And then I realized that there were some trainings that I missed, and you get them until you take them. One of the things that is a next step for us as a district this year is to make sure not only are we getting the notices, but we're doing the follow-up to ensure that everyone has actually done the training. So the notice is one thing, but the monitoring is something different. We've already met with our principals. really had really great, rich conversations around safety and security. Each of the principals is doing an individual safety assessment for their school. They're doing it, which is unique to their environment. This is new that is happening for them. And this year, every school, we know that some schools have done this in the past. Sometimes we would see it with more high school students than not. But every school in our district, for all of their grade levels, will do grade level assemblies around school safety, because our children need to know not just the procedures, but why it's important for us to have those discussions. Also, we talked about security staff being trained in the warning signs of adverse behaviors. And of course, we do our background screenings and training for all of our third-party vendors as well. The last is report. When we started having the conversation May 2nd around how we're doing notification. So at many of our schools, we have a notification button where we would press the button and it locks down specific areas. And that's all I'll say about that, because that is a part of our crisis management. So I don't want to go too deep into that part of the conversation, but that's already available. But the other thing that we noticed at the school is we wanted one more layer of a contact in terms of emergency and 911. So over the summer, and I offer thank you and kudos to our team for making sure that this occurred. I got the confirmation this morning that now all of the schools actually had this, but each of our schools also has now a separate phone that will allow school-wide communication and immediate access to 911 just by picking up the phone at each of the school buildings. And so that's something else that's also very important that gives another level of security. Emergency responders are alerted 24 hours a day. So if there is a concern, if there's a 911 call, 24 hours a day, there is alert for that. And the quick access buttons I shared with you are provided on the phones, allowing also building-wide announcements. This is new, and this is not one that we are connected with as much as a district, but it's one that we are connecting with now. We started doing research and connecting and having conversations with Ohio, and we recognize that House Bill 123 actually started new safety legislation December of 2020, and this is a telephone number that is active. It's active right now. I called the number today, and a live person answered the phone. The telephone number is 844-723-3764. Once this number is called, an anonymous report can go in for any level of concern that is an emergency. Not only is there a telephone number where there is a live person answering, there is also an app that allows the same thing to happen. So if there's an anonymous call and that call references an emergency, let's say that it's a fire emergency, that report then goes to the fire department. If there is an emergency where the police is needed, that report goes to the police department. So this is something that we want to make sure that we share and that we share across the community, because it is another way to make sure that you're able to report information, or that if you see something, you say something. Next steps for us collectively. Everything is around more. Everybody say more. Everything is around more, because our district has done so much. It is important, however, that we continue to align, we continue to make the conversation forefront, and we continue to talk about where we see challenges and gaps. More. So, more frequent training for students, staff, partners, and volunteers. That's an area right now of focus for us, because we're working with the students go through the drills, they go through the drills, they go through the drills. But we also have partners and volunteers that are in our building, and how we orient them in the case of emergency is also important. We also want to make certain that as we're looking at our training, we're training, yes, in terms of safety procedures, but we're also increasing the training that we're doing across the district in restorative practices, in the monitoring of the training that we're doing in mental health first aid. We've already started with our principals. We started the initial training with our principals back in June. We'll start that next level of training with our teachers on August the 16th, and it's not a one and done, because it's important that we continue to bring it to the forefront and continue that work together. The other area is we currently have a task force that works on the code of conduct. So the code of conduct that we have is not done in isolation. It is done through a task force. but a code of conduct committee. But we also want to establish a safety task force that's comprised of students, staff, parents, and community members to consistently review our safety protocols, our discipline, our drill procedures, and restorative practices. So if you're looking for an activity or a way that you can give back and get engaged, make sure our team knows that before you leave, because we do want to make sure that that happens for us. Improve delivery and consistency of mental health resources and services by staff. So continuing to do more in terms of delivery and making sure that there is clarity. Our alignment, our district-wide alignment for our safety protocols with our schools, with our police department, and with our other government agencies and our local agencies. We have 3 schools that are not currently served by CPD. So we also have to engage with those departments because the schools sit in a different area and it requires additional support. So making sure that we're doing that through the alignment process. And more frequent meetings with our SROs, our district leadership, and our building principals to better understand roles, response, training, concerns, so that we're truly aligned and partnering. And last but not least, and this is across the board, I think it's a common theme, our goal is to consistently communicate with you. I'm looking at the room tonight. I don't know how many we have on social, but I'm looking at the room tonight. And that says to me that whatever communication protocols we use this time, those worked, because we have individuals that are sitting here with us tonight as a part of the Safety Town Hall. So give yourselves a round of applause for being here, and thank you to those that are also, that's a bad round of applause. We can do better than that. Thank you so much. We want to make certain, though, that we continue to improve our communication by every channel that we have, continuing to improve communication for our parents, for our staff, for our principals, for our students, for our greater community. And so at this time, that is where we will stop. If you have questions, now we're getting ready to transition to our first panel. If you have questions, I am going to ask you to jot those questions down on your card. Make sure that one of our team members gets your card so that we can get them to our moderator. For those that are online, if you'll put your questions in the chat, we want to be able to do the same thing. So at this time, we're going to call our panelists for the first discussion to the podium. We'll start with our moderator, Dr. Moffitt, who is coming up with us now. Let's give Dr. Moffitt a round of applause. I want to make sure I don't leave out anyone here. Okay, we also have our interim chief that is here with us tonight, that's joining us tonight, Chief Thiesie as well. Let's give her a round of applause. We have our person that's really responsible for moving forward and continuing the work around our community collaborative, and that is Ms. Iris Rowley. He is on this part of our panel as well. And I believe, Mr. Sherwood, I covered everyone for this part. Is that right? Oh, I'm sorry. And Ms. Myrie, who is the education chair for the NAACP, that's coming on this part of our panel also. Thank you so much for being here. So at this time, I am going to turn this portion over to Dr. Moffitt. I'll move down a seat since there are a few of us. I'll turn this portion over to Dr. Moffitt, and we'll pick up from there.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. Okay, it is working. Got to put my specs on. I'm turning into my parents. I have to put my glasses on so I can see. So on behalf of the Cincinnati Public School Board and my colleagues, Eve Bolton and Carolyn Jones, I want to say welcome to everyone for joining us on our panel. And this is super important to us because as a board, we are charged with governance and making policies that not only keep our kids safe, but that are connected to the community. So we are super charged about the town hall with our superintendent and that you are here with us. So our first question is going to be, I'm assuming for everyone, what can you share to assure parents that their children will be safe from both an in-school perspective, including training and protocols and police response? So let's start with our assistant police chief.
I'm good. I'll share. So thank you very much for having me here tonight. I think this is an extremely important conversation to have, and I'm thrilled that the police department has been invited to be a part of the conversation. So thank you for that. So the answer to your question for what can we share with the parents to assure them? So first and foremost, I want them to know that the entire police department is extremely well trained to how to respond to a variety of incidents, ranging from maybe a student that is just having a rough time, and our SROs most likely would be the first line of response to that. So take from a student who's just having a bad day and might need some help, all the way up to the unthinkable, which could be a potential active shooter in a school. And it is super unfortunate that we have to talk about that, prepare for that, train for that, but that is the world in which we live right now. So my assurance to the parents would be that the Cincinnati Police Department as a whole, in my opinion, is the best trained police department in the country to handle all types of incidents, including active shooter incidents. And so the SROs are extremely well trained, every officer on patrol and other assignments, because we have to recognize the fact that in the event that there is a critical incident in any of the schools or any business in the city of Cincinnati, we don't know who the first officer on the scene will be. So they are all trained equally for critical incidents. I think if we go back several years to the unfortunate incident that happened at Fifth Third, and the way we were able to bring that to a fairly quickly resolution, unfortunate but quick, is a testament to how well our officers are trained. So I definitely think our assurance to the parents would be that their children would be protected by the best trained police department in the country, and then also the assurance that the SROs in the schools play a significant role above and beyond being police officers. They are extremely passionate about their role as school resource officers, and they take it very seriously, and they love making those connections with the students, so with the parents' children. They love making those connections. They are more than police officers. They are counselors. They are mentors. They wear many, many hats, and so I personally applaud them for what they do each day for the Cincinnati Public Schools.
So Superintendent Wright, you spoke about the school perspective. Thank you so much, Chief, for the police perspective. What can parents do from a school perspective? And then I'd also like to get you all from a community perspective.
I think from the school perspective, there are a couple of things. And the first is making sure that we're engaging with the expectations and the protocols of the school. So we have one point of entry at our school buildings. In some of our schools, at the opening of schools, we do add additional security in different locations to get all of the students into the school quickly. But outside of that time, honoring the fact that we come through the front door, that we really talk to our children about their activities at the school building. True enough, if they see something, say something. Say something to someone. We know that some of the issues that we deal with and have dealt with across many of our schools in the country oftentimes start in the neighborhood. And so really making sure that if there is something that is brewing in the neighborhood that is bringing its way to the school, communicating that with the school beforehand, so that there is an opportunity for the school to get involved, for the school to get engaged, and for the school to do follow-up. The third thing to that is recognizing that this is the first priority for us. Our children cannot learn at the level that we're looking for them to learn if they're concerned about whether or not they're safe. And when we have conversations with children, a lot of times they talk to us not necessarily about the safety at the school, but when they're coming to school, on their way to school, where if they're feeling safe, what paths they're walking to get to school. So I would encourage, if there are community members, that you have some additional time, just being out and about as children are going to school so that they are seeing other adults. You know, I come from the era that's what communities and what neighborhoods did. They were outside, and there was always someone's grandmother that was off at a certain time that was watching the children as they were coming home. And so really giving that sense of ease to our children so that they also know that somebody else is paying attention.
Now, before you answer that question, and this is in real time, I'm going to ask our superintendent, what do you want parents to do if something happens? We live in an era of phones, so kids call their parents, say, something's happening at the school. The parents' first response is, I'm about to go to that school. What do you want parents to do in the event that something is going on? Because they might be running into danger. So what do you want parents to know with respect to how to handle an incident if there is one?
I actually would like for them to contact the school, but more importantly, I would like for them to encourage their child to go to the nearest adult. The nearest adult at the school. As we are working with our teachers, we're working with our staff, we want to make sure that everyone has the information around how to deal with issues when they arise. And so telling a student to go find a parent or to go find a teacher or to go find the principal could put them in harm's way. So we want them to go to the nearest adult, and then we continue to work with our staff on their process and their chain of communication when that happens.
From the community.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Thank you, Superintendent, for having this session. It is high time that we have these conversations and that we catch up with what's going on in the third decade of the 21st century, and the state of where we are. And on behalf of our children, I just wanted to go back to your first question because it does start with what can you share to assure parents that their children will be safe? Just wanted to dovetail off of something the superintendent said. This is a collective we. There is no one person. Children don't typically reach out to their parents when things are going wrong. They reach out to their friends. So they have group chats and they tell each other something's happening. So the response that she just gave is absolute. We need to be teaching our children to find safe spaces when they are not in a safe space. So what is safe in their communities? And that is for community members. But I also wanted, when I read this question, I thought, what can I do? Was what I've been doing for 20 years, is to ensuring that this is a very well-trained police department and that everyone is treated with respect and that there is transparency and accountability when something doesn't go right and that there is the connectivity between CPS and CPD and that those of us in the community, all tax-paying citizens who are concerned about these issues have the opportunity to weigh in and be part of figuring out what the solutions are. The other thing that I wanted to say is that when we connect on the level around children and their safety, whether it is in the school or around the school, then it becomes about community members. There were 5 shots several years ago. 5 people were shot behind South Avondale Elementary School. I contacted the principal. I said, I'm about to start walking. I don't wait for people. I just start doing, because I, like you, was raised in that era when Auntie sat on the porch and Big Mama looked out the window and somebody could say something to you. But that was before you needed to be approved through the school to walk children up and down their path. So if you know about South Avondale, you know that 90-something% of the children are walkers, and they're walking along a thoroughfare. They need assistance from people in the community. So what I would suggest to those folks who would love to get engaged, as the superintendent said, as we have been saying, join your community councils. The safety committee is not just about telling the police what somebody else is doing. It's about figuring out what the issues are so you can determine what the problems are in your community. Can't be done by CPS alone. Can't be done by CPS alone. It can't be done by the citizens alone. We have to do this in a collective way.
Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to wrap this up. I will say, in my current role, I am a field supervisor, and I am in CPS schools frequently. And to Superintendent's right, her point, most of the things that she discussed are in the schools. I made the fatal error last year when I visited one of my schools. I typically went to the 3rd floor, but I made the fatal error of going to the 2nd floor. And a few teachers looked at me like, why are you here? They didn't know who I was. My third floor people knew who I was, but those second floor people had no idea who I was, and they were checking for me, and I think they were actually calling, trying to figure out who I was in the building. So they're definitely looking at, and I'm bringing the teachers up for a reason, because the principals in the building are not just responsible for the children, they're responsible for those teachers as well. So you want to make sure as parents that you are putting your voice at the table where the teachers are. So the schools have an LSDMC. They have parent-teacher associations and committees. They also have opportunities for you to join for some of these parent-teacher conferences. We encourage every single parent per policy 9140. Get involved with the school so that when things happen, you're not surprised. When you get that principal newsletter that says new staff, you already know because you went to the cookout before the school year started. So as a community, let's make the schools that little triangular piece that they've always been in the community. Don't wait for the bad news, because I can tell you right now, we have parents in this district that have blocked CPS from their phones. That's not a good look. But I'm happy to hear about the bat phone, though, because the bat phone is going to be a good thing to kind of block the social media piece, because they get the news before the parents do, and then everybody's in arms. So it's nice to have that. But I'm going to say, as a community, the best thing you can do is join your parent-teacher organization, get involved, be lockstep with the principal and the school resource officer, so you know what's going on, good, bad, and otherwise.
I think this one's working now. I have to turn it on and off. If I can add one more thing to that point, and that was so relevant. We are doing an audit right now of the number of calls that we send to families, because we know that there are several families that have blocked or opt out of calls because of the number of calls that they've received. The challenge is, to the point that was just made, when you opt out of a call, you're not opting out of just that call. You're opting out of all calls that come from the district. So if there is an emergency and we are making a call to the family to notify you that there is an emergency, you will not receive that call if you're opt out. So it's important that we share that information with families. The other thing, while we're talking about the opt-out process or even the robocalls, please update your telephone number. We're going to a new year. Our new year starts on August the 18th. That's the first day of school. You will receive all of those forms. You will receive those forms to complete, and it includes a telephone number, because us having your correct number is really important, so that if there is truly an emergency, you're able to receive that information as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And I've been one of those parents that just felt like I was getting too many calls. So I understand, but we need you all to stay connected. We really, really do. So can you all speak very briefly on what parents and families can do at home to help? We talked about the school responsibility. We talked about the community responsibility. What can parents do specifically at home in terms of preparing their children for emergencies, but looking out for warning signs? And then what would some of those warning signs be? Let's start with Superintendent.
So a couple of things. One, and you know, we live in a no snitch era, right? So that's why it's so important that we're communicating with children around the importance of, if you see something, say something. The life that you save might be your own. So if you see something, say something. Tell someone what you see. If you have one of your buddies that is communicating with you through chat and saying something to you that may be harmful to other people, tell someone else, because that helps to protect everyone. The other thing that's really important for families is, as we think about firearms, there are families that have approved firearms in their homes, making sure that those firearms are away from children and they are locked and under key. That also includes firearms and the ammunition that goes along with that. So we want to really make certain that we're emphasizing that for families. The other thing for communities, if we talk to a lot of our children, and these are the things that we don't always want to talk about, but if we talk to our children, they will also tell you where the community weapons are. They will tell you where to locate the community weapons. So talking to them about the fact that they're sharing that information and then getting those weapons to those that can dispose of them appropriately so they don't get into the wrong hands as we're talking about warning signs, if we go, there are several different ways for us to look at warning signs. There's information that's on a CDC about warning signs when there are challenges, when students are having concerns. There's information that's on the Homeland Security site. We have information on our website as well. But you're looking for changes in behavior, changes that are outside of the norm for your child or even children that they're in interaction with. And those are the things that you want to share with the school, because that way we can then follow up. We have the appropriate staffing to do the necessary follow-up. The last thing on this piece is when the forms come home for all of our families, please give your child permission. If your child is less than 18, we have to get permission from families to interact with them around their individual issues. So for them to get support through our mental health therapists, we have to get permission from families. Sign off at the very beginning. Sign off at the very beginning. That covers our school-based health centers, and it covers our mental health support. So sign off so that if something comes up outside of just a regular emergency, we're able to do the necessary follow-up with it.
Okay, so I'm going to say there's one very simple thing that parents can do, and that's trust. When you get your children up in the morning and you send them to school, you trust the people in the building that they will send your children back home, not a hair out of place, not a scratch, not a bump, not a bruise. So let's keep that trust going all the way through. Trust through your conversations. Trust through the decisions that you're making with your child at the building. Trust that the decision that they made was the best decision they could make at that time. Trust that when they call you, that they're partnering with you. They're forming this relationship, because if we do it right, we're going to have your children for a very long time, and we're going to spend more time with your children probably than you do. So the very simple thing that I'm going to ask, and uncoupling with all of the things that are put in place, is to trust the educators. You trust, like I said, you put them on the bus, you let them walk to school every day, but then something happens as soon as they step over that threshold, you forgot that you trusted the educators. So that's what I'm going to say. Thank you.
I wanted to piggyback off of something the superintendent said around changes. Sometimes blow off behaviors. Sometimes we see children or adults and we go, oh, that's okay. That's just them. And it's not. It's not okay. And if it's not okay, find out, say something about it. The other thing around what can families do around emergencies is be real about what's happening in your environment. Talk about community. Figure out how to have these conversations in a way that it's not so traumatizing that the child doesn't know. Children know way more about where their surroundings than we really want to hear from them about, because it's a pretty sad state sometimes. The other thing superintendent mentioned around guns, gun safety includes continuous gun training. I know that the state just said that if you're qualified, you can have a firearm, but as an adult, your role in this life is to stay continuously trained and not to just assume that because you were trained one time that you know how to continuously operate that weapon. Continuous training, continuous conversation with your children, and continuously being real about what this world has dealt them. It's not their fault that poverty exists. It's not their fault that they can't be welcome, especially if you are a Black child. That is not their fault. But what we can do is deliver the best form of communication with them about their environment so that they can live through it, be through it, grow through it, and become the productive adults that we want them to be.
Thank you. I think it's been said many times here that the see something, say something. I can't tell you how much we use that verbiage even outside of this discussion about in schools, but everywhere to the folks who are here and online. No matter where you are, if you are at an event, if you are, at the airport, if you are in a school, that motto is so important to everybody. If you see something, say something. You know, it's a lot of us understand if there's something that makes the hair on the back of your neck stick up, that's probably a good indication that you should be telling somebody, I should say, about something. And so, yes, absolutely, see something, say something. If I could go back for just 1 second, though, about, what should parents be telling their kids to prepare in an event of an emergency? It's very easy to tell them to stay calm. It's an emotional time, that probably is not going to happen. But still try to reinforce them, stay calm, do whatever an adult nearby is telling you to do, whether it's the school resource officer, staff, or teacher from Cincinnati Public Schools. Just follow the guides of what the adults are telling you to do, and hopefully we will bring it to the quick resolution. And I apologize. My mind, when we start having these discussions in law enforcement, we very often plan for the worst and hope for the best. So that's kind of where my mind goes when we start having these types of discussion, because I think that's what the public as a whole across this country have come to expect in these conversations. So yes, but in the event that is an incident going on in the school, just tell your child to find the nearest adult, go with what the adult is telling you to do, and we hopefully will bring it to a successful resolution as quickly as possible.
Well, we said a lot. We talked about trust. We've talked about talking to your children about, unfortunately, we live in a time where we didn't have to talk about those things when I was younger. We had the tornado drills. I don't know if you all remember the tornado drills. You got in the line and then you got on your knees with your head down. You stayed there for 5 minutes. Our students nowadays are dealing with so much more than that. So we really have to have different types of conversations, and we have to be comfortable as adults having them. But we also have to trust that the staff have been trained. Every one of the staff have been trained on what to do. So to tell your children to find an adult, they know what to do. They've been trained in this. And to stay calm is probably not realistic. Let's move into, okay, so we got an audience question. So let's start with the police chief. We're just going to get down to it. Describe the role of the SRO, and are they active in school discipline? The superintendent shared with us what the role of an SRO is a little bit, and that they're only in 16 of our schools, but they have a caseload of 60 schools, 70 schools. So that means that they're not in all CPS schools. They're in some private schools and some charter schools. So let's start with you, police chief. In your opinion, in our opinion, there have been studies that SROs negatively impact students, and that's not our opinion as a board. That's the question. So how can you ensure that SROs contribute to student safety and not threaten it?
Thank you. I think first and foremost that they contribute to the student safety because every one of those SROs are handpicked. So we have a police department of over 1,000 sworn members. So when you talk about 16 SROs, those 16 SROs and their supervisors, their sergeant, their lieutenant, are handpicked from amongst 1,000 officers. And so they have to have a certain characteristic and traits to deal with the students every day. They have to be passionate about wanting to be around youth in our community. They have to be passionate about wanting to help these youth in the community. So they are there, as I said before, they know they wear the hat sometimes of being a mentor. They know they wear the hat sometimes of being a counselor. They know that there are times where they have to put on the hat of being a police officer, and only in those specific situations. Because not only is it a trait or characteristic of them to want to be around the youth and helping the youth, it is also extra training that they receive on how to mentor, how to recognize trauma in children, among many other things. So I would like the parents to know and be reassured that they are selected because, one, they want to do it. They step up and say, I want to be an SRO. And then we make sure that they have the characteristics and traits And then we make sure that they have additional training as well to be an SRO.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. And that's a great question. And it's been one that's been going around for a very long time. Specifically to the report that you just talked about, everyone knows that Cincinnati Black United Front and Iris Rowley, this has been our role to reform what we know as our Cincinnati Police Department and anyone else around us, because there are many municipalities that surround us that children come in contact with also. And so typically when you've talked to me about police, they just say police, and I have to drill down and say, well, who are you talking about, right? The report, the details didn't meet the headlines, and I have a serious working relationship with the ACLU of Ohio, but in reading the report and trying to make the point about the SROs, it just wasn't clear. And not just to me, but many of my attorneys that read it. And I am a big component of restorative justice. And one of the SROs out of CPS, because I thought the abuse was happening at the levels of teachers and administrators, just pushing kids in that way, and that people didn't understand what the SROs actually did. Now, SROs call me when there's things and crisis happening at school. Can you please meet us? Can you come and help, right? We're not trying to arrest our way out of things. SROs are different than regular beat cops. They are trained more than other cops are. These individuals that the chief just talked about that are hand-selected to work with young children, especially teenagers, are special, because teenagers, their number one goal is to get under your skin. I know I had 3 of them. I now have grandkids, right? That's just their job. And so they do a phenomenal job in working with children. They also do a phenomenal job in identifying societal issues. We just don't listen. They also do a phenomenal job in helping children work out their issues that they're currently going through. What I would add, Chief, is that I would love to pull them out of CPS and put them in the community, because I think y'all getting the best of the best. And if I could get all the CPD to be trained and have the characteristics that SROs have, I would be happy. The other thing that I wanted to say about the SROs in this time where we are, we know that House Bill 99, I don't know if you're going to address that, and I'm glad that the board decided not to adopt that language that the state put down, is that it is now a critical time because any and everybody that is supposedly qualified can have a gun. And so when you talk with parents, and I now have a granddaughter, little peanut butter, will be at SCPA. I want to assure her safety if grandma can't make it, because if I'm coming, I'm leveling the whole plane, everything going down, right? So y'all don't want that. So we need to have practical, realistic conversations about accountability, whose role it is, what this looks like. For continuous improvement, we can't have a one and done conversation. But we do have to understand what restorative practices looks like. And we can't have zero tolerance when we're talking about discipline, because we're talking about children. And so I think that we need to have a comprehensive and then a global conversation around SROs, teachers, restorative justice, and what that looks like for all of us. And in that, and accountability and transparency. And I think that would take us further in this conversation. The report didn't do all that for me. Are there any SROs in the room? All right, SROs. Y'all my friends now, because they don't like me either. No, I'm just joking.
Got them here. Yeah. And just because I'm really big on everybody doesn't understand what House Bill 99 is, but you referenced it. So that is what was signed by the governor, allowing districts the ability to arm teachers in their buildings. Cincinnati Public School, our board came out with a resolution. I think he passed that on Friday, and Monday we had a resolution that said that's not going to happen in our district. And so it was a unanimous decision. We do not support that teachers being armed in our district at all. So that is definitely a thumbs up and a clap. And we anticipate and have charged our superintendent to do more of these. And so this, when you talk about talking and engaging the community and telling what's going on, this is going to be our norm rather than an exception. So the only thing we can do is just keep doing it. So you've got board members here, you've got a superintendent that want to engage and want to continue to talk. And so we're going to do that. Did you want to add anything, you two ladies?
I was only going to add that, like Ms. Rowley, I had conversations with the ACLU, and as a data person, data is my love language. I said, well, do you have any data that you can do a comparative analysis to the positive interactions with the police officers? Because I'd like to see that data. Oh, we don't have that. I said, well, then that's the report you all need to request to do that research in the district, because I can guarantee you, as a educator myself, you have more people who are speaking about the positive things that are going on with the CPS and CPD relationship than the negative things. Negative press always gets news. This is clickbait. But we need to get to the skinny of what's really going on in these buildings. So if you really want to know, talk to the superintendent, see if you can get, I don't know, 30 days to research, follow the SROs and the principals around. That'll be a totally different story. So I'm going to say, if there's anybody out there in cyber world that's got a little bit of money for me to walk around with the SROs and CPD, let me know. I'll do the research, and then I'm happy to report.
It's on deck. Come on, superintendent, bring it on in. We got a plan.
And this is the last thing that I will share, and I appreciate all of the comments that have been made. But just last week, one of the bullet points that you saw when I did the presentation was additional and more consistent communication between the SROs, between leadership, i.e. my team, and school principals. Because just last week I met with the SROs, as many of them as I could. And the ones that I could not meet with, I could not meet with them at that time because they were running youth programs at that very moment. When I look at the data for our SROs, and I've worked in 2 other school districts, and I think that this is relevant. I've worked in 2 other school districts where we had our own police department, and I was responsible for the police department. So the police chief in those 2 school districts reported to me. And what I see here with the SROs is different, because with those officers that are in our school, the vast majority of them are graduates of CPS. If they are not graduates, they have children that are either currently in CPS or they've graduated from CPS. They spoke earnestly about the vested interest that they have in our children and why they decided to be an SRO or why they applied to even be an SRO. So I think the conversation, I applaud the support and the collaborative and how that's happened and the work that's happened with the training, because when you look at the individuals that are actually serving, it would be my preference at this point. And I like Ms. Rowley would like for everyone to have that training. But at this point, it is my preference as the leader of the district that the individuals that are working with my children, and all of them are mine, the individuals that are working with my children have the level of training and the compassion for our children that I actually see with the individuals that I've interacted with at this point. So I'm going to ask one more time for us to put our hands together for the support that's been provided for our students.
They do an awesome job. And I know many of them. And just for 30 seconds, Chief, can you talk about the other things? We talk about SROs, they're in our buildings, but that is a program that is not funded by CPS, but they have responsibilities. Can you talk about like other things that they do very quickly? I know there's a camp.
Yes, absolutely. So predominantly when the school year is out for the summer, but even during the school year, they are involved in so many things. It's actually hard to keep track of it. I have to sit down periodically and say, okay, what's this program? What's this one? But during the summer, they are doing many, many youth programs. I recently had the ability to go up to Camp Joy and see how our police department interacts with some of the youth from the city of Cincinnati at Camp Joy. Many of those volunteers, the adult volunteers to be counselors during that week, are SROs, among with a few other officers, but a lot of them are SROs. They also help us with our city camp. That is for children in trauma, and that is for a younger age group. They spend, I believe it's 6 weeks with them, pretty much on a full-time basis for 6 weeks, and teach them how to resolve conflict, teach them how to know that they are important, to make sure the kids know that they themselves matter. They teach them a multitude of topics. They also run our cadet program. We have a group of cadets that will be graduating this Friday. Our city camp just graduated last Friday. And so they are very, very involved with the cadet program as well. And I mentioned some of these programs because it's that passion for the youth that got them to be SROs in the first place that takes them, once the school year is out, into more youth programming. So when school is out, we do not bring them back to the police department and have them run, in a district or run beats. They continue youth programming in some form or fashion all summer long. So they truly are SROs, youth advocates, mentors, counselors, all year round.
And I said, and they learn about the collaborative agreement, the MOA, Memorandum of Agreement between the Justice Department and the city, and the collaborative refresh. I think this was the first year I missed talking with the cadets because I was working with the water boys. But they learn all of the heavy things that adults are dealing with around policing. And that is through the SROs. And whether they disagree or like Iris Rowley for the work around the collaborative agreement, they make sure that I have an opportunity to speak with the cadets, just like training, we speak with new recruits and lateral recruits and all that good stuff.
Thank you. Okay, so this is our last question. Is this an audience question? This is an audience question. So, understood that all safety protocols are not able to be shared. What are the students trained to do in the event of an active shooter situation? Is it based on run, hide, flight protocol? And what can we do at home to reinforce?
Yes, so I will hit on this a little bit, and then if one of the SROs would like to add any additional information, feel free to do that. The run, hide, fight protocol is still the norm of what we want the children to do. Obviously, if they can get away from the situation, get away from it as quickly as you can. If they have an ability, if they cannot get away and they have the ability to hide, then that's what we want them to do. And only as an absolute last resort do we want them to fight with anybody. Only if they cannot run away, they cannot hide, and the last resort is to defend themselves, then they need to do what they need to do to defend themselves. I don't know if any SROs have anything they'd like to add to that. Yes, absolutely. So I think it's just going through something similar to what I just said. Explain to them under what circumstances we would want them to run. Explain to them under what circumstances we would want them to hide, and when we would want them to fight. And let them know. We try to teach our children to be polite. Throughout every interaction they have with other individuals. This is not a time to be. So whatever they do, whatever extremes they have to do to fight, to defend themselves or defend somebody else, all bets are off. Teach them to do whatever they can do to defend themselves or somebody else.
And Dr. Moffitt, parents should do that for from and to school as well. Practice, planning makes us all better informed. So not just in school looking for an active shooter. Shooting happens on the way to school. The same thing. Just reinforce that your life is valuable. Do not stand around and be looking to see who's doing what. Get out. Get to a safe space. Find an adult to talk to. And as the chief said, last resort, if you have to fight someone, do that. But be mindful, no matter where you are at all times, to make sure that your individual and the people that your individual self and the people that you're with are safe.
And I will also add, when we do our drills, and this is something that does make it a little bit different, that's why it's important that we maintain open communication and conversation around training with our students. Because when we do our drills are specific to hiding. So I don't want any of my high school students to hear this and then say, well, Ms. Wright told us to run. So during the drill, right? During the drill, we want you to hide. I was a high school teacher and a high school principal for a long time. So I know that one of my high schoolers is going to say, I saw this and this is what you said. So during the drill, and that's why it's important that we understand the difference and why we maintain open communication. During the drill, we practice hiding, getting away from doors. We're auditing all of our doors that did not lock from the outside. We've done that since May the 2nd. We've audited the doors. We've ordered locks for those doors so they can be locked from the inside. So those are things we lock, make sure the doors are locked. Those are some of the things that we do as a part of the drill. But when we're talking about a true active shooter situation, this is the protocol that we teach across the board.
Perfect. Now, the good thing
can I
too.
just add one?
Uh-oh.
I
Okay,
just
go
want to
ahead.
add one thing.
Come on.
Because we're a very large and very diverse school district. And run for some kids might be run to the door, but run for another kid might be run home. So I think the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you're partnering with your principal so that you know exactly what that school plan is. So you know what run means in this school. So there's no, it's not left open to interpretation. So make sure that all of these things, these wonderful things that Superintendent Wright spoke about earlier, that they're in place in your building. And if they're not, go to those parent meetings like we suggested earlier and say, I heard there was an emergency plan, a task force here that I want to join because I want to be well versed on the plan for my building. So please make sure that you understand the plan for your school because run means different for everybody.
That's perfect. And that's actually encouragement for you to partner with the teachers and the principals of your building. Partner with the district. We are in the spirit of partnership. We're going to take a break for 5 minutes and come back and talk about mental health safety. Thank you so much to Interim Police Chief DG, Mrs. Iris Rowley, Collaborative Agreement City of Cincinnati, Ms. Jennifer Myrie, Cincinnati NAACP, Superintendent Wright, thank you as always. We will be right back. We're just going to switch it out and then come right back. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, are we ready? All right, we are back. Is everyone ready to continue this awesome discussion? So we've got a brand new panel of wonderful experts, and Superintendent Wright is going to introduce everyone, and then we are going to solicit questions. Superintendent Wright.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining back in with us. Hopefully you were able to share in the first part of our panel discussion, which was really a great discussion, and so we're looking forward to the second part as well. So we have new panelists. We'll start with our moderator, who is one of our board members, Dr. Moffitt, who did a great job with moderation for the first half. You can clap, that's perfectly fine. For those that are just logging in with us, we do have two other board members that are here in the audience with us, and that's Board Member Bolton and our Vice President, Board Member Carolyn Jones. So let's give them both a round of applause as well. So our panelists for this portion, I will introduce them and then we'll jump right into our discussions because we do want to honor time and make sure that we end at the time that we said we would. So I'm going to start to my right because she's sitting in the seat that she's sitting in right now because currently she is on call. So if you see her get up and exit for a minute, it's because she has a call that she had to take during that time. But we have with us Dr. Ashley Marie Berry, who is the professor of psychiatry at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and a whole lot of other accolades that I could add to that, but I think that's where we will stop. So let's give Dr. Berry a round of applause for being here with us. We also have our very own Dr. Carrie Bunger, who is the Director of School Culture and Safety for our school district. So let's give Dr. Bunger a round of applause as well. One of our faith-based leaders in the community, Pastor Nelson Pierce, is here with us. If we'll give him a round of applause as well. And new to our team tonight, and we thank you so much for being here, we have a parent that volunteered to be a part of our panel tonight, and it's Mr. Kevin Q, who has 2 children in our school district, so it's a current parent in our district. So at this point, I am going at Mount Washington. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Kareem Moffitt.
I'm excited. Don't look nervous, you all. So we want to know what you know best help the mental health of our students. So let's jump right in. First question, what types of mental health supports will CPS students have at school and even in the classroom? Let's start with Superintendent Wright, and then if you all, and Dr. Bunger, and then if anyone else wants to jump in with some suggestions after they start.
So I think as we shared during the presentation, there is a menu really of supports that we offer around mental health supports for our students. We want to start with recognizing that all of our schools have school social workers. Our school social workers are mental health first aid trained. They're also trainers of mental health first aid. They conduct small groups with students. They conduct one-on-one sessions with students. So that's one area that we have for support. Our curriculum is supportive in that in our curriculum across all grade levels, there are lessons that are embedded in our curriculum on social emotional learning. So that is something that happens across the board in all of our grade levels. In our advisory classes, and that you can think about that like a homeroom class, that's a separate class, but for our 3rd through 12th grade students, we offer additional social emotional lessons in the classes for them as well. And in terms of our mental health support, we have mental health providers that are provided in partnership with MindPeace that are in all of our school buildings. All of our school buildings, our students have access to our school-based health centers where they're not only able to get medical support, but they're also able to get mental health support. And so those are just a few of the areas that are available. I'm going to ask Dr. Bunger to add on to any of the ones that I may have missed.
So I'd also like to recognize that we have school counselors who are trained in academic counseling, but also social emotional counseling and college and career readiness. Those are in our K-12 buildings as well as our 7-12 buildings. And school psychologists. There is a school psychologist in every building, not necessarily full-time, but school psychologists assist with individual students in terms of intervention, assessment, and coordination of services, and can also make referrals. Cincinnati Public Schools has a long history of being able to provide crisis assessment and intervention and postvention. So if there is a case, sadly, if a student or an employee dies suddenly, passes away, we have a crisis team that also comes in and provides grief counseling and support. And that has been in place for several years and continues to provide that additional support. So I wanted to provide that as well. So I think that there is a breadth and depth to the mental health supports that are in place, not only internally, but also with community partners in terms of Mind Peace.
You all want to add anything that, say anything?
Yeah, I would like to add, as Iris Rowley mentioned in the first panel, that it's important that community plays a role in this too, and that we don't just think about the mental health support of CPS students as something that the schools are responsible for, but that we all have responsibility for it. As a faith leader, it's part of the role that churches can be playing and should be playing. We have coaches in the audience. It's one of the reasons why sports teams are important, that all of these places where children belong, where they have real, active, felt community, play a critical role in supporting the mental health. And it's one of the reasons why it's important that we do what we can to make sure we have as few isolated children as possible, that as many children are connected to some community where they belong.
I'm just going to talk about Mount Washington itself, but the mental health supports that our students have access to are primarily provided by Beach Acres, a community partner in Mount Washington, and they do a bang-up job.
So before our next question comes in, Superintendent Wright, can you speak to this? Kevin brought this up, that community partners are partnering with our schools. Can you and Dr. Banger talk about some of the partners that are in our schools and the mental health services that they're providing for our kids?
Sure. So under the large umbrella of Mind Peace, there are a multitude of community mental health partners that are within that collaborative. And what's wonderful is within a community learning center model, the schools work to select the community mental health partner that works best for their school and their school environment. So maybe Beach Acres, Central Clinic, Best Point, among others. And so, but every school receives that support in terms of access to care, mental health therapy, within the schoolhouse, but then also if there needs to be additional referrals, that they can do so. As long as the parent is comfortable and the parent drives that car, but as long as a parent is comfortable, they can sign consent so that the therapist that's in-house in the school can also share information, relevant information, with the teachers, so that then the teachers can recognize concerns and supports and be able to help that particular child. But again, that's dependent on the parent and their comfort of sharing information. But that has been very helpful, I can say, as a school psychologist and as an administrator, to have that open line of communication so that educators can support the students, and there can be that support between the mental health therapist and the schoolhouse.
So those forms come, again, in the beginning, when they get that big, thick book to fill out of all those forms, the forms for mental health services will be included, and then they need to send that in just once.
Yes.
Right?
So I imagine a world really soon, where those forms are electronic, but that will not be before August the 18th. But in our opening of school packet, there is a release that's in the packet, and it's a release for parents to sign for students that need medical support, which includes the mental health support as well. So we're asking families, we don't know initially if it's something that is needed, but if it is something that's needed, it's easier for us if we have the approval already and on site versus then having to contact the parent, having to send the information home. So we would ask, just as a part of the normal enrollment process, or completing the opening of school documents, which gives your name, address, telephone number, and all of those things, those documents are equally as important. So making sure that we sign those releases.
Thank you. I would like to just add to that, as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, it's very valuable to have input from school counselors, have input from the social workers that are in the schools, because they are working with the kids and the teachers in their natural environmental settings, and getting that collaboration with them is very vital for us to understand underlying diagnoses, to understand symptoms, and to overall be able to better help the family figure out what's going on with their child and how to help their child. So I absolutely advocate and recommend that any parent strongly considers and thinks about the importance of their children getting this type of service and resource available to them in the school.
Thank you. So CPS does have social workers in every school. So what would the process look like if I'm a parent and I recognize that, maybe something's not right, or maybe it is okay, but I want some help. I need some assistance in figuring that out. What would be the process? How do I go about doing that? Getting some assistance.
Contact the school. It's just as simple as contacting the school. At the school building, the social worker at the school, contact the social worker at the school. You can inform a teacher at the school. They can share the information with the social worker. But whoever you feel comfortable with at the school, make contact at the school so that that information gets to the social worker. There is a referral process at the school site if something is identified or there is a concern, or children can self-refer. But if a parent is seeing something, it's important for them to contact the school so that we can follow up on the concerns that they see.
I have one more question as a follow-up. What happens if I don't have insurance, or I may be between jobs and I'm not exactly sure if I have insurance? Can my son or daughter still receive some assistance for mental health services?
So in terms of insurance, that is a complicated web, but certainly for students that are Medicaid eligible, if there is consent and a referral that's completed, the Community Mental Health Agency can work through that process. If a student is not Medicaid eligible but has private insurance, it depends on the agency on whether they can service that student or not, or it may be a situation where it's outpatient versus within the schoolhouse. But certainly there are instances where other referrals could be made. There's always opportunity with our school social workers, school counselors, even our school psychologists to provide individual check-ins, but intensive therapy, more often than not, comes from our community mental health partners. And so it'd be continued coordination and work with families around that. Last year we did have success in being able to help newcomers that did not have Medicaid eligibility to link them with services by using grant dollars. We were able to do that through federal grant dollars. So there are opportunities for those that are new to the country and may have experienced trauma while traveling into the United States. So we've been able to link them up with services. So there are options out there. But depending on the situation, and certainly within the schoolhouse, we can provide individual check-ins. But again, that individualized intensive therapy typically comes from our community mental health partners.
And I would also like to add here, for parents that may be listening, whether a parent has insurance or not, we don't want that to be the one something that keeps them from engaging around the needs for the children. Because as Dr. Bunger shared, working with our partners sometimes is working with parents to help them get paperwork completed so they can get services that they're eligible for. So it's much greater than I have insurance versus I don't have insurance, or I have Medicaid versus not having Medicaid. It's really important, if the child needs services, that we give consent for them to receive what they can at the school site, and then work with the providers to work through all of the other areas.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would like to ask about the role of social workers in schools, because I don't want to assume that every parent understands what social workers do. And I know there is a lot of historical trauma, particularly in African American communities, where social workers have torn families apart as their first mode of operation, and those stories are passed down generation to generation. And there are some parents who I might imagine might see social worker and think absolutely not. And so maybe it might be helpful to explain a little bit about what they do.
So I'll do the first part, and then I'm going to pivot to Dr. Bunger for the second part. I think the first thing that we would like to share in that space is all of us, and that's all educators, are bound by an educator code of ethics. And so there is some information that that educators become privy to, that it is our responsibility to report. And so I hear the first part of what you shared, but that's something that I want to share. One of the things, I've been doing this for a long time, and one of the things that I would share with my students sometimes, depending on what they were sharing with me, I would share with them, I am required to, depending on what you share with me, I am required to report this. Now, I will walk you through the process. I'll hold your hand all the way, but I am required to report certain things. It's the same way with our school social workers. So I think that that's the first part of that. However, our school social workers provide one-on-one support for students. They provide social emotional learning activities for students. They can provide tier 1 and sometimes tier 2 support for students in terms of mental health support. But if there is a greater need that's more therapeutic in nature, then it requires more than our social workers are able to do at the school building.
So Superintendent Wright pretty much was in my brain. So that's a very dangerous place to be, Superintendent Wright. But in terms of the role of the school social worker and CPS, certainly, like Ms. Wright said, we are all mandatory reporters. The primary focus for our school social workers is to remove barriers to learning, and to do that in directly with students, but also in support with parents, guardians, and families. And part of that is providing social emotional support. Part of that is making referrals and helping families get access to care. We help with truancy prevention and attendance. So how can we help you come to school every day? And those are the larger buckets, I would say. Those three things: removing barriers to learning, social emotional learning, access to care, and truancy prevention and helping students come to school. I thank you for raising that and having the opportunity for us to have dialogue around it. It's very important. I can't say that every time somebody's, you pick up the phone and say, I'm the social worker, that everybody's like, yes, and gets incredibly excited, but we're continuing to work on reducing that stigma, right? And making sure that no matter what, whether it's a school social worker, school psychologist, or school counselor, that folks know that we're there for them and to support them, and that this is not shame or blame or judgment. This is support. So I thank you for raising that.
Dr. Ashley, can you define social emotional? What does that mean before we get into this next one? What does social emotional mean? We keep hearing about that. What does that mean?
Yes, so certainly the development of any child, you're looking at their social skills, the way that they connect and interact with other people, as well as their emotional skills. So the way that they are perceiving experiences, whether those experiences are positive experiences or negative or traumatic, and that directly affects the way that a child develops, their brain development, their cognitive faculties. It has a huge impact on their growth and development. And so it's just important that we're mindful of their social environments, their interactions with others, as well as their emotional perceptions and feelings and experiences.
Can you all talk about how restorative justice plays a role in the mental health and the mental health well-being of students, but also how does that impact their social emotional learning? You can, whoever wants to jump in.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Restorative justice. Restorative justice. How does that impact the social emotional learning of our students and their mental health?
Yeah, so when I think about restorative justice, these are, of course, I get paid right now. When there's conflicts between parents and children or conflicts with peers, this can directly impact a child's emotional, social learning and experiences. So it's important to have a sense of understanding how their relational experiences with one another, with their parents, with their families, with other children. It's important to recognize how that can directly impact their ability to function in their settings, especially in the school environment. So if there are conflicts that are happening at schools, if there are kids that are having physical conflicts with one another, verbal conflicts with one another, or there's a lot of verbal or physical conflicts in the home, it's important that as a provider and as community members that we recognize and understand that that has a huge impact on that kid's ability to learn and develop and grow. Again, that kind of whole social emotional aspect is very important for growth. And so it's important that we understand that restoring those social connections and making peace, if you will, with those social interactions can have huge positive impacts on those kids moving forward.
Thank you. And I will also add that when we think about adverse childhood experiences, we're really talking about the kind of situations, experiences, sometimes trauma that children have gone through. And so when we think about restorative justice or restorative practices, it's really one of the foundational areas of restorative practices is how do we repair the harm? How do we look at what's occurred? How we work through what's occurred, how we help children process that, regardless to where it is, how we help them through that process. Equally as important is how we prepare our staff to recognize what those signs are and recognize what the supports are that can be provided even in a classroom environment that will then assist in repairing the harm. Because what we find in working with children that have gone through adverse experiences and they are working through those processes, we look at triggers. My background is dealing with students with special needs. And so as I think about that, we look at triggers. And there are some behaviors that might seem very, very simple, but they trigger past experiences. So if we don't know that going into that, then we don't know what the antecedent was to the behavior that then causes the next step, which can become volatile when really had we understood the warning signs to start with, we know how to redirect the behavior, how to give them the opportunity to work through those processes that would get them to repair.
Okay.
And then I would also, dignity really is an important part of this, that we all need a sense of dignity. It's important for all of our mental health, but especially for our children. And when it's done well, the benefit that restorative justice practices has is that it honors the dignity of all parties involved, the parties that offended and the parties that were offended. And so that we can find a way to work through the offense while honoring the dignity of all people involved.
I think this is an audience question. Will CPS or does a partner provide mental health first aid training for parents? And what can parents do if they suspect a mental health issue with their child, and what are some of the warning signs?
I can speak to that. Yeah, so that's a really good question. It is so important, as it's all of our responsibilities, not only as parents, but as family members, as friends, as aunts, as uncles and cousins and teachers. It's all of our responsibility to monitor for any kinds of warning signs in our children. And those warning signs can vary, but Superintendent Wright did a really good job earlier of expressing the importance of change in behavior or change in functionality. So that could look like a child who's usually mild-mannered all of a sudden becomes aggressive or starts to act out, and it seems out of character for them. That could also look like a kid who is very outgoing, all of a sudden becomes shut down and isolative. So you're looking for any change in a normal pattern of behavior as a warning sign, and you're also looking for any kind of decline in functionality. So this would be like a kid who usually is performing their activities of daily living. They're eating normally, they're sleeping normally. all of a sudden they're not eating, they're going days without eating, or they're not sleeping at all, or maybe they're sleeping too much. It can also look like maybe you're not tending to your showering, or kind of tending to your body, normal body, important hygiene habits. So things like that you would want to look for. It's also important to look at how they are functioning at school. So are the grades declining? Are they losing friends? Are they spending time with friends and peers? Because that's normal and healthy that kids are spending time and having social interactions with their peers. So you're pretty much just looking for any changes, and certainly don't want family or parents to be paranoid about this, but just paying attention to your kid and like what's different about them or what's the same about them. And then the important thing is really getting intervention and help. And so the school certainly is one huge advocate and area. Again, an environment where kids exist and live in every day that are noticing and are helping you as parents to notice that things are different with your kid. We're seeing some different signs and we're concerned. And it's important that we pay attention and we all take that responsibility to do that. There are other specific warning signs to look for. So I'd like to speak to the most important ones are any concerns for someone discussing thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves, wanting to end their life, asking, why am I here? What is this about? I don't want to live. Anyone expressing thoughts of wanting to hurt others. Those are huge warning signs to look out for. And those are absolutely reasons to immediately either take your child to the emergency room, take them to Cincinnati Children's right down the street from here, because we do have 24-hour trained psychiatrists as well as trained social workers that will evaluate the child at any time, day or night. As well as there is a resource available to call the Psychiatric Intake Response Center, and I can give that number out as well. It's 513-636-4124. That number is staffed 24/7. So if you just have a question or a concern, hey, my kid's exhibiting these symptoms or these signs and I'm worried about this, you can always call and someone's available 24/7 to answer your call and help guide you to the next steps of what to do next.
That's perfect. What was that number? Tell us one more time. And what is it? It's the Children's Hospital.
It's Psychiatric Intake Response Center, PIRC, PIRC, and that's 513-636-4124, and 24/7, 365,
so much.
all of the time.
You know, I think that as our kids get older, the tendency is, well, we'll give them more independence, but we may need to be a little nosy. We may need to inquire more and ask more questions because they need it, and they really do. Kevin, what do you think as a parent?
Yeah, I was actually going to talk to the first line of the question. That Partners, at least Beach Acres, does provide something like mental health first aid. They have classes on for parents on how to navigate big feelings your kids are having. You know, if you have a new baby or there's a divorce or the death of a loved one, how can you as a parent support your kid and get them through those kinds of feelings? And I've taken those classes and they've really helped a lot. It's, you know, just because you have a kid doesn't mean you know how to raise them. And so it's important to reach out for help when you need it.
And I think this is a good time for the community to get involved. If you've got neighbors that are little nosy rosies, but it doesn't matter. Let them tell you, hey, I noticed they're coming in later. Employ the neighbors, the community, teachers. Again, this is that theme, teachers as parents. Dr. Ashley, what were you going to say?
Yes, I apologize. I didn't mean to cut in there, but Pastor Pierce spoke on something earlier that I thought was very important, and he was talking about stigma and just the perceptions, especially in the African American community, in my community, that we just don't talk about these things. We keep it to ourselves. We're supposed to be strong. You know, our family members or other people will look at us negatively if we seek mental health, professional health. And I just really like to just share how that really has negatively impacted our community and our Black youth. We are sadly seeing the Black youth suicide rates have doubled, which is astounding in the past 10 to 15 years. And we're trying to figure out, why is this happening? Certainly, we do think that trauma plays a huge role in this, as some of what was referenced earlier, adverse childhood experiences. But certainly stigma and the lack of the child being connected to resources and interventions early plays a huge role. And so that's why it's so important that we are getting kids connected to the services, the help that they need early, and not waiting until a crisis emerges. Certainly, if a crisis is emerging, we do want you to come to the emergency room, but not waiting until the very last minute when you're noticing these warning signs and these symptoms that your child is demonstrating. Please getting them that help and support, because we're here, we're in the community, and there are people that look like your kids too here that want to help. And so please do get them that help. So just the awareness and saying it's okay, you're not alone. I'll be here with you throughout the entire journey. We're in this together. Will definitely help with the destigmatizing of mental health in our community. And certainly just having that support from even our religious counterparts is helpful. Just to educate, because we do rely on our pastors and we rely on other mentors in our community to help give us sound advice of who to get help from.
I want to add, I want to put a plug in for Faith as a broad base to talk about the importance of it in terms of protecting and promoting positive mental health, that people who have some sense of spiritual grounding or connected tend to have better mental health outcomes. And so sharing that with our kids, whatever your spiritual faith or tradition or practices or beliefs are, sharing that with kids helps them to have positive mental health outcomes. Also, I want to say, to your point, that in the Black church, historically, we have done a really bad job of demonizing mental health and trying to pray away problems that we needed to go talk to trained professionals about. And that's one of the things that we've got to continue to do as pastors and faith leaders, is to say, yes, pray, and go seek help. That sometimes the person that God sends in your path to help you is somebody who is trained with a set of skills to deal with these type of issues. And so those can go hand in hand and don't have to be antagonistic towards one another.
Thank you
Clonia.
so much to all of our panelists. We want to be respectful of time. It is 8 o'clock. I'm going to let Superintendent Wright finish this up, but I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Ashley, for all of your insight. Thank you so much, Dr. Bunger, for all that you do for our district and your insight. Pastor Nelson, thank you so much for being here and connected to our district and for your wisdom. Parent Kevin, we really appreciate you as well. So Superintendent Wright's going to close us out.
And Dr. Moffitt has thanked everyone else. And I want to thank you, Dr. Moffitt, for being such a great moderator for tonight. And thank you to our board members that stuck with us the entire time. Let's give all of our participants a round of applause. As we launch our new school year, the school year starts on August the 18th. Thursday, August the 18th is the first day of school. On the first day of school, we're looking to see all of our students in school on the first day. Know that our number one priority, as we started the conversation, I want to end the conversation. Our number one priority is safety. Our children, before they can learn, They have to have both physical safety and psychological safety. So thank you for engaging with us tonight. Thank you to all that were on social media with us tonight. This has been recorded. It will be uploaded. So if you did not get a chance to see the first panel or see the presentation at the very beginning, please take time to go back and look at that. Share it with your children. Share it with your community. Share it with others. Remember, it's okay not to be okay. It's not okay to stay not okay. We're here to help. That's what we do. We appreciate you. Have a great evening.